Nelson Nash said, which is banking as a process, not a product. And so often we associate banking with a specific institution or a specific product or something like that. Banking is a process, and at its fundamental level, banking is storage and access to capital.
I like to always say is I pay bills with the bank, but I don't store my money at the bank. And when you start taking control of that, you'll start creating more wealth. You'll start allowing yourself to have more capital on hand to take control of things as they come along, because opportunity always seeks cash out.
There is a distinct difference between being used by the bank and we're their product, and knowing how to use the bank for our benefit. There's a very distinct difference, and that's really what we're talking about. And like you said, Brock, beautifully, because Nelson was so emphatic in becoming your own banker that this is a long-term thing, it's going to take time to build the ability to control more and more and more of the banking process, but that is always going to be worth it as compared to never controlling any part of it.
Welcome to the Cashflow Legendz podcast with your hosts, Nate, Brandon, and Brock. Remember, our insights are not direct financial advice, so consult with your financial team before making any decisions based on the topics discussed in this show.
Welcome to Cashflow Legendz. Nate, Brock, and I are stoked to be here. We really do just believe that we have the privilege to share the knowledge that we get to be around, the experiences we get to have, all the awesome members that we work with daily. And we do not take lightly that you're spending your time, your energy, your bandwidth with us. We really appreciate that. If we bring any value or bring any questions, we love comments and likes and all those things that push the algorithm. Nate and I were chatting this week how the algorithm had both of us in the same loop on our phones because we were seeing the same things. One of those unrelated was a Matthew McConaughey tuna fish sandwich. And we both had seen that video, and Nate's made it twice.
On a more serious note, I don't know about you guys, but I've gotten more feedback on the episode that we did about our greatest financial mistakes or failures or whatever, than just about any video that we've done so far. I had a lot of people reaching out to me, texting me, hey, this was really meaningful, all that stuff. So maybe we should just talk about how terrible we are more often.
Well, considering the fact that I didn't even remember that we recorded that, I guess, it was actually pretty good.
Yeah, you blotted it out of your mind, Brock. You're like, yep, I got all that out of there. That was not fun. Let me forget it as fast as possible.
Yeah, there we go.
I think it's a great reminder that it's never fun to talk about your failures. And that's kind of one thing when we hit record. It can be very easy in any type of media going out to just share the wins. And let me just be very honest. I like to talk about the wins way more. Like, it's easier to do, but I'm really glad that our team asked us to talk about that because I've gotten the same feedback. What I think it really does for all of us when I listen to somebody else's podcast is it helps us realize that the process and the journey and leaning into that with the lessons that come along with it is just as important than the success.
Yeah.
Because those lessons help us get more clarity on what success means to us.
Yeah.
And that's the most important piece.
And we've talked about this before, like some of the greatest breakthroughs or like bonds that we've experienced or developed or whatever has been through being vulnerable.
That's true.
And, being vulnerable in trusted relationships is really important. But when you are vulnerable, you're just reminding other people that we're not Superman. We don't have it all figured out. We're still putting our pants on the same way you do.
You went old school there, one leg at a time, walking uphill in the snow barefoot. Yeah. I love it.
I'll tell you, like, yeah, it's uncomfortable, but it does an extremely good thing for everybody being vulnerable in those tough moments. Like, I'm part of an investment group, and the other day we had somebody post about the fact that they had just crossed over the $1 million mark a year in passive income. A month earlier, we went through what we call our losers lessons call.
Oh, wow.
That was an uncomfortable call, to say the least.
So was that framed out where you had a few things you were discussing relevant to that topic?
Oh, there was nothing that we talked about outside of us losing money on deals.
Okay. That's a good segue into our topic today. Your money, your terms. And why do we let banks control our future? Now, lots of times we have to remember somebody listening to this. If you're listening to this the first time, you may go, well, I didn't know there was any other option. I didn't know that I could control anything related to the banking world. If you're familiar with what we do and the infinite banking concept and how we learn to control more of our cash flow and make it create new opportunities, then you go, well, I knew that was something that's possible, but maybe go into more depth. And then if you're like us, where we're around it all the time, we talk about it all the time, there's always new layers to unfold. And so we're going to keep it at a high level first and just start with this idea of why do we give banks the power over our financial decisions and how can we learn how to take that back? So let's just start with, why does the majority of the world give control to the banking system?
Yeah. And let me first start by saying we are not trying to completely eliminate banks
There you
because
go. Great
you
job.
cannot do that. We need banks. We need checking and savings accounts. We need to move through that. Like
Thank you, Brock.
none of that. But there are aspects of, if there are things that we want to finance or invest in, things that we have a different time horizon or we don't want to be tied to somebody else. Like, for example, let's say that you flip homes. Sometimes it's not very fun to flip homes and you flip it, but then you can't find a buyer for that. Nobody is, I mean, you're trying to sell it, nobody wants it, or they want it, but they're just waiting for something to happen. If you finance it with a bank, you still have to pay that note every single month. Whereas if you were to have been able to have the capital set aside in your own system, you would have been able to come up with the own terms of how you repay it back and when you repay it back. And so what we're going to be talking about today along the lines is, you might not be able to do everything in your life on your own terms, banking wise right now, but eventually you could probably work your way there if you're just diligent in how you set up your cash flow.
That's really, really good. We did a video last week or the week before that we recorded at a very high level. It just shows the importance of having a cash flow system. So basically, money comes in. How do you tell it to do what you want it to do? And does it create the impact that you want it to create? And that's really what Brock's talking about. And then once we know we have the reins on those dollars, or like Brock's dad says, sometimes once we know we've corralled them, if you're in the country, okay, then you start going, how do I want those, corral dollars to start working for me? When am I going to let them out? And what are they going to do when I let them out? And so, Nate, in a very simple sense, let's imagine we're talking to somebody who's only ever paid cash, or let's stick with the banks right now, only ever used the bank for loans. And that typical transaction at a high level, credit cards, mortgages, car loans, house loans, what has to happen, and then what happens once you get qualified in that entire process?
It goes back to something that Nelson Nash said, which is banking as a process, not a product. And so often we associate banking with a specific institution or a specific product or something like that. Banking is a process, and at its fundamental level, banking is storage and access to capital. Now, with loans and credit cards and everything like that, the only way that those transactions work is if there's flow of money, if there's movement of money. Now, what banks do, some people just don't know how banks make money. The way banks make money is they use your deposits to loan out to other people. There's more nuance to this, but at just a very basic level, I'm not getting into fractional reserve banking or anything like that. So at a very basic level, they use your deposits to loan out to other people, and they'll pay you an interest rate, and they'll charge someone else an interest rate for the money that they loaned out. When you deposit money to a bank, effectively what you have created is an IOU where the bank now owes you that money back because they've lent it out to someone else.
Right. And when we borrow money from the bank for anything, even if we go to credit cards, who controls the rules? Not
Bank.
us.
That's
That's
right.
right.
It's whoever was the at the top of the promissory note.
Yep.
That's who
So
controls it.
with those rules, and Brock, I really am glad you clarified early on, and I say this often in prospects and member meetings. We can't get rid of banks, but there is a distinct difference between being used by the bank and we're their product, and knowing how to use the bank for our benefit. There's a very distinct difference, and that's really what we're talking about. And like you said, Brock, beautifully, because Nelson was so emphatic in becoming your own banker that this is a long-term thing, it's going to take time to build the ability to control more and more and more of the banking process, but that is always going to be worth it as compared to never controlling any part of it. And this is where we really help people a lot of times when we're working with them think through starting is better than not starting, because you're going to get your wheels to turning and going, oh, this is what it means to grab a little sliver of the banking process in my life. Is there a way I can create more opportunity to do that? Because when the bank tells you what the interest rate is, what the repayment timeline is and amount is, and it's connected to the collateral that they've given you the loan for, we have no control that is beneficial to us other than if we keep following those terms. That's it. And that's really what we're describing. So if you took those three things, control of repayment, rate, which we won't dive into deeply, but rate and repayment timelines, and you could start controlling one of those, two of those, three of those for any financing needs over our lifetime, what does that really allow, Brock, as we start taking control of a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more of that? Maybe just on the interest piece at first, because that's a big piece most people don't think about.
Well, number one is more control and confidence.
Yeah. Yep.
um, it's funny that we're talking about this today because I have a member that I'm working with right now, and he's trying to build a house. He's got more than enough equity in his current home, more than enough cash in the bank, and I mean like $500,000 just sitting in the bank, and over 500,000 sitting in his current home right now. And the bank is asking him hundreds and thousands of questions around. I mean, he laughingly said yesterday in our meeting, he goes, "I swear they've asked everything, even how many moles I have on my back." Like they want to know everything, and yet they still won't give him the terms or help him get it done. And he's been trying to do this for like 6 months now. And when we think about, as we begin to take this into our own circle, you're going to have a ton of money that you save throughout the years if you are diligent with your finances. You should have a bunch of money to then move other places. And I like to always say is I pay bills with the bank, but I don't store my money at the bank. And when you start taking control of that, you'll start creating more wealth. You'll start allowing yourself to have more capital on hand to take control of things as they come along, because opportunity always seeks cash out.
I remember the first time on Twitter when I started talking about controlling your money, and people were like, what does that even mean? And really, really what it boils down to and what we're talking about is control is maximizing access to capital and access or maximizing opportunity of that capital. So having access to it and also having the opportunity to put it to work and everything like that, and you being the primary benefactor of what's going on with your money instead of someone else.
Yeah. Nate, something to clarify that you just said is maximizing access. Well, somebody probably listening to this is probably going to say, yeah, Nate, that's great, but maximizing my access is through the bank because I can get it to it immediately. I can do it. However, it's not just maximize the access, it's maximizing the jobs, the efficiency, the long-term aspect of it, right? The bank is great to utilize for access. However, if you looked at the jobs that your dollar does when it goes into a bank account, I think it has maybe two, if that. Grow your money, maybe right now for at least past 3 years, and access it. When you look at a whole life policy, if that's where you want to store your capital, which that's the way I prefer to store most of my midterm capital, is I put my money there and I can access it. Yeah, it might take me 7 business days or less to get it. I'm okay with that. But I not only get growth on the money, but I have a pretty good idea on what that growth is going to be, not for the next 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, but the rest of my life. I get disability waiver of premium if I want it. So somebody's going to continue to put that money in my policy if I get disabled. I get long term care benefits. I get terminal illness benefits. I get the access to dividends. I also have this permanent death benefit that's going to be there the day that I die, because I know that we all live until we don't, which allows me to leverage all my other assets to create more income for me during retirement.
Brock, you just did a great job of walking through your dollar doing one job or multiple jobs. And so the other day I was meeting with a member over coffee, and right now they just have their human life value protected through convertible term. But we've been having conversations for a year. Really smart young kid. He's about your age, Brock, but that's a kid to me. And he's like, okay, business is starting to pick up. I've got a rhythm of how my cash creates a bigger buffer, peace of mind. Okay, that's all money is it either helps us get closer to where we want to go, or we realize we don't have it and we want to try to get more of it as far as our mindset goes. And so he's like, so if I start thinking about expanding and controlling more of the banking process, which we're just discussing, he's like, can you explain to me why putting my dollar into whole life and utilizing the infinite banking concept and mindset is more advantageous? And I said, yep. I said, grab your pen and I want you to write down when you deposit money into your savings account at whatever bank you deposit money, what benefits it gives you. You write them down, because he was going to go home and visit with his wife about this, because she's also a member having these conversations. And he's like, well, and he wrote down maybe peace of mind. And he put maybe there because if you know anything about the banking world, that can bring up a whole lot of other questions. Okay. He put down accessible, but he also knew the bigger the amount got, sometimes it wasn't accessible immediately. Okay. And then he put maybe a little bit of interest, but then he put taxes to the side because he knew he'd have to pay for that. And I said, okay, now I want you to start another column. And this is for key piece, permanent insurance or whole life insurance with a mutual company that's paid dividends for 100 plus years, which he has connections to. And we listed and we stopped at about 7. And that was guaranteed. That wasn't a if. It was basically, if you pay this premium, this will happen. And he's like, makes sense. And I said, now come over here and think about that cash that you control to borrow against, capital. And now let's make a list of how you can use it in your business. That's your external rate of return that's related to how good you become at being your own banker and controlling capital in your life. So he's like, so he's a business owner and he knows that certain things he buys in his business will create a certain return or efficiency. And he's like, holy cow, I can take this $1 and not doing anything crazy, create 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 uses of that $1 and create the ability for more money to come back to do it again. And if I swing and miss and do something stupid, I've got this guaranteed death benefit because it's not if I die, but when I die. I said, I couldn't have said it better myself. It is just taking one tool and seeing how beneficial you can make it throughout all these stages of your life instead of just trading one for one. So why do banks do such a good job at handcuffing us to the dependency of their system? Let's really break that down. Like, why does it get us? Guys, we talk to people all the time that have outside debt that is just suffocating them. Nate and I are not free from that. Go back and listen to our episode of where we talked about our failures. Okay, we have to know what's going on before we know what we'll do. Okay, or we will be right back where we were because the system's created to keep us there. Why does the banking system do such a good job of keeping us financially dependent in regard to the things we typically need and how we use the bank?
Yeah, that's a good question, Brandon.
I don't give them questions ahead of time if everybody's wondering. I like to really see their face think through it.
I wouldn't want to understand. I wouldn't want to know the questions beforehand, but it's like the first place I'd start is the marketing. Like it always starts at the marketing because there's billions of dollars being poured into these banks that say you need to bank with us. Bank with us. We're here for you, so we can get you there. All kinds of different things, and that's just what we've been ingrained with of saying, "Hey, this is where we go. This is what we're moving forward." And throughout time, more and more of those marketing dollars has then transcended into Wall Street. Well, a lot of people don't understand that Wall Street is really just a bunch of banks like Wells Fargo, Morgan Stanley, Merrill Lynch. Like they're banks first, and then they have investments around it that you can open things with. And if you looked at the rules of the government, financial institutions, and corporations, it's they want our money on a consistent, systematic basis over the longest period of time. And then when they want to give it back to us, they want to give it back to us in the smallest increments of time or the smallest amounts over time while continuing to hold on to it for the longest period of time. And you want to know why? Well, because if the money's in their bank accounts, their coffers, because you put it there, they now get to go and utilize that somewhere else. So I think that is like what has the main aspect on it, the main triggers of saying this is why people are bolted to it. But you also have to go back and look at history. And I don't know where we could find this stat, but I remember it given to me one time was around World War II, nearly 50% of America, if you were a US citizen, you had money in whole life insurance and some type of annuity. Well, since then, people have veered away from that, I would say, because we get more information faster and faster and faster. And it's more people are dragged into the conversation of how do I get a better rate of return rather than how do I maximize my money supply and benefits.
Yep, that rate of return thing, Nelson says says this in Becoming Your Own Banker and many other places through our mentors. Once we know what the problem is, we will know what to do. So, yesterday, having a conversation with a lovely couple, one of the guy has been a member of ours for a while. They are engaged now. So, we're having conversations together. And what was fascinating that was said is there was some outside debt that was kind of becoming crippling, because here's the thing: if we have, of the thousands of credit card debts I've looked at, the average rate on them across all of them is about 25 to 30%.
27.99.
Okay, I figured it was right there. Yep.
I can just see it in my brain. That's like all I ever see.
One of the first things, and Brock's dad taught us this, and this is through a lot of other conversations we have. One of the ways we first start to recognize what the problem is we have to first understand how that problem is created, or we will continually try to just create the symptoms. So we're having this conversation, and she says to me, after we went through our little 10-minute cash flow system is more important than rate of return. And she was like, that makes a ton of sense. And I said, you mind expanding on that? And she said, because this is the second time that I have been right where I am right now. It's just a little worse this time. And the first time I got a windfall of money for selling my house, and I swore I would never come back. I would never do this again. And here I am. And I said, well, first of all, we're humbled that you would even consider sharing that with us, because that's a big deal. Secondly, we are always the present best thinking that we have, looking for new knowledge to be better as we move forward. Nobody wakes up and goes, hey, I want to suck today. Nobody wakes up and goes, hey, I want to be average. Okay. So she said, I agree. I said, so now that you know the system's created to keep you locked into that mindset, now you know what the problem is. It's going to really help you create how you get to your why, because now you know the rules of the game, like Garrett says. Once we know the rules of the game, it's what, how does he say it, Nate? I'm missing. He says, once you know the rules of the game, you can decide how you want to play the game, or something like that. I don't remember how he phrases it.
Well, you can win then play is the
Yep.
philosophy,
Yep. Thank you.
which is, create the rules and then go play the game.
That's right. The traditional banking world, guys, typically has somebody going to get financing for liabilities, period, point blank. So, what do I mean by that? We look at numbers all the time, and what we normally see is that somebody's trying to get a rate of return so high on a savings rate so low that the math will never create the life and the result that they want. But it's because they're doing what they think they should be doing, because they don't know yet that there's a better way. And just by changing your awareness of how cash flows through your life, and where to store it, and when to move it, and where to move it, can create so much more control of dollars throughout your lifetime, that then you will get better at doing and then the next thing, whatever that is. Brock, what are you thinking?
I'm thinking how great of a podcast this is, and how I wish more people would listen to it from a basic level. Because it's, again, it's not like us saying eliminate all the banks. You don't need bank accounts. Like, no, like they are a part of our system. We want to use them. But how does money flow? Like, how can you start taking back some of that control, the power back in your own hands, so you have more options? To me, it's most people, if you have a job, you make an income. Where does that income go? Goes into a bank. And then you either spend the money, or you keep the money before it goes into something else that you were told or you found does better than the bank. And then you put it in that thing, and that thing pays you back. Whether that's appreciation, interest, cash flow, dividends, whatever it is, it pays you back. And it doesn't matter if it goes back to the same exact bank account with the same exact account number, or a different one, it always goes back to the bank. What we're trying to say here is, whenever you do that, you always lose the interest that you could have been earning if you were able to use it in two places at once. So if we took that same scenario and just said, hey, you're still going to put the money in the bank. We're just transferring out the back door of that bank money into your own policy through whole life, dividend paying through a mutual insurance company. Once you put it in there, then you can utilize it to buy that same exact asset, that same thing that's going to pay interest, appreciation, whatever it is, right back to the bank. But you get to put it back into your policy right after that. We're just adding one little step that's going to create tremendous results within your life if you stick to it and do what you want to do throughout your life.
I just kind of had this image in my head about momentum behind your dollars. If we were having a race, so to speak, and we both put a dollar on the ground and we said, okay, you've got to get from this point to this point. You can't touch the dollar. Well, in that case, the only thing that's going to move that dollar is wind, you know. So one of us might be laying on the ground blowing that dollar, but the other one might go grab a leaf blower. The efficiency of money is that example, that analogy of someone might be blowing it with their mouth and somebody might be using a leaf blower, just putting momentum behind your dollars and getting that strength built up to where you get to where it gets to move at a quicker rate.
That efficiency piece is something that I think has unearthed as we continue through this process, Nate and Brock. I know you've been around this longer than we have, but if my dollar continually gets more efficient, then I am not required to feel like I have to chase risk to get more money. So the peace of mind goes up, the awareness goes up, and the clarity goes up, which then typically over time, even with failures, allows me more clarity on how I can do better in treating those dollars to make them efficient. And I heard Myron Golden say this the other day. He goes, if you don't make your money move some way to benefit your goals, it is going backwards. Even if you believe that it's only 2% inflation, 100 turns into 98, a dollar turns into 98 cents after a year, however you want to look at that. So you're fighting these forces you can't see. This is why so many times when we do a cash flow review with our members or potential members, something like this is said. I didn't realize that much money was disappearing out of my life, or I didn't realize I could control that much more of my money now that I'm giving it a job. And that's all it is. Well, guess what? When the banks have billions of dollars to market, they make you believe that depositing it into their system only as your only way of utilizing money is going to give you the most benefit, while they're going to do the opposite as soon as they get it. And so if Brock, Nate, and I, and our little bitty community that lives this, had trillions of dollars to market, we could shift the tide much quicker, probably, because we could get out there and do the same thing that banks are doing. Hey, put your money in this product while we go do this process out the back door. Okay. So it's really is, like you said, Brock, and I've heard that statistic before about how many households had whole life insurance before World War II or up to World War II. It's because there was less noise, less travel of information speed wise. Basically, information traveled through family and through recommendations and what the other families did. But the cool thing is that's what we're doing now. We're working from the ground up. And so once people realize that they can start slowly but surely taking over a little bit of that banking process, once they recognize it's going on, the amount is not what matters. It's the mindset, period. And then they start going, oh, well, now instead of giving the bank 30 grand in interest over the next 20 years, I could create a system that I could keep 15 grand of that. Well, now more money staying in your life. And I know we all believe this, and I'm going to make a strong assumption anybody listening to this believes, or at least is intrigued enough to think about it. We have a better idea of how to make our money live through our lives the way we want it to than the government, than banks, than Wall Street. I'm not saying don't put your money in Wall Street. I'm just saying first. And that's relevant in all kinds of government thinking, because I'll speak on something I know of. The Department of Education federally did not get created until about 1980, and they have slowly but surely taken away control at the local level. Okay, but now there's some conversation of it being eliminated. We'll see. But I can tell you this for sure. Elysian Fields, Texas, and its mindset around here, they know what their students need better than Washington, D.C. No doubt. Same thing for where Nate lives, same thing for where Brock lives, and we all live in three very different places. And so I think one of the biggest fear pieces that I see, guys, and Brock, you interact with a lot of younger members, but is the uncomfortableness of knowing I'm going to unlearn something. That's really the first biggest piece. Would y'all agree with that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we have to ask, why is that fear there?
Just 'cause it's different, Not everybody does this. And then, we always get the question, well, why don't more people do this? Well, because it's hard to change and there's not a lot of people talking about this. And then when they do talk about it, most people don't want to listen because they don't want to change their mind because it's uncomfortable. And we love comfort zones nowadays.
That comfort piece, there's a key theme that I see often. Brock and Nate, I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts from who all you've talked to in the last couple of weeks. And I'm thinking of somebody that I've been visiting with. I hear things like this from people who aren't scared to unlearn, even if it's uncomfortable. I hear things like this. I don't fully understand that. Explain it to me like I'm, a baby. I know there's probably something I'm missing. You're an expert at this. teach me as much as you can teach me. And I kid you not, I could probably create a one pager of those 8 to 10 things. And those mindsets of openness, awareness of, as Nelson said, being aware that arrival syndrome is real and you got to fight it every day. They are almost always the wealthiest people that I talk to are the highest income earners, or they're on their way to being. Let's just sit in that for a second. Why? Why is that the case? Now, flip side, somebody who has done the same thing for a long time and nothing wrong with what they've been doing. It makes sense to them, but they can't take the next step and they're very convinced and they say things that convince themselves to stay where they are. It's the fear piece because of doing something different. And so Nelson said always, unlearning is harder than learning. And I think that's what we're really describing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
I
think
think,
that
go
I
ahead,
think
Brock.
that all the time of like growing up. So I had this hitting coach, and I might push some buttons on some people here. So I had this hitting coach, and he holds something like the highest batting average throughout college for like 3 years, the most home runs, like all of it. And he was my hitting coach. And anytime that you hear about hitting, especially in Little League, it's all about hit down on the ball, just hit down on the ball. But then when you go start, talking to these bigger name hitting coaches, like along with that guy, I also had another hitting coach who is the hitting coach for one of the highest batting average people in the major leagues right now. Well, not a single one of them said hit down on the ball. And every single one of them said, "Oh, it's okay to keep your back elbow up," because they knew the mechanics of how it worked. But then once I did it, once they said, "All right, try this," it was the most uncomfortable feeling ever sitting in the box trying to do this one move or change. I felt like I looked like a bozo trying to do this thing. But what was really actually starting to happen was I was stronger, I was more powerful, and I actually looked like I knew what I was doing up there. And so I think a lot of times at first it's going to be really uncomfortable and you might feel out of place, but what you'll start seeing or what you'll start noticing is if you just look from the outside looking in, you're a lot more powerful than where you were before.
You kind of read my mind when you went to the coach, because in my what I was thinking is sort of a litmus test for where you're at right now is one, asking yourself, are you coachable? And also asking, are you getting the results that you want? If you can answer those questions honestly, then that'll give you some insight into what your next step needs to be.
Nate, I love what you just said there. If you're getting the results you want, I'm going to go back. If you know what the results are that you want first, the number of times that we have conversations and we ask genuine questions of where do you want to be and why, a lot of times that foundation is not even set. It's just going through the motions, whether successful or not, whether at peace or not. There is not a clear layout of I want to be able to say that I'm working towards this thing clearly. Once you have that, then the unlearning starts putting you on a path to the new learning that you will feel good about how you're headed there. Even if you swing and miss on occasion or you dip your shoulder and pop up, you're like, I now at least know this is the path I'm on. And this is why we did a episode a while back about being the Lone Ranger. This is why I've begun to encourage people that are new to this. Hey, look, you are developing a new pathway in your brain. One of the biggest things that you can do is keep developing it. If you're married, talking about it with your spouse. If you are chatting about it, writing down questions that just prong your curiosity of where you want to go and how could you get there. Nothing's off the table. Just get as creative as it can be. Or a friend or a brother or a sister that you know. But do not, in my opinion, try to tackle this on your own by yourself. That's the beauty of hop on a podcast, read a book, schedule. And now we've gotten way more consistent in encouraging people to go, let's get you on quarterly calibrations where we can clearly set where you want to go, why you want to get there, how you feel good about it through your faith, family, fitness, finances, and what freedom and wealth means to you. And let's set some targets. And now you're not just swinging at this moving target that you don't even know. Okay. Because Brock and Nate, we know this in sports. I can go up there and have the greatest swing ever and smoke a ball and still get out. I can also go up there and take a terrible swing and get a double. This is the truth of sports. I can let one rip from the 3-point corner that I'm like, there's no way that's going in, and it catches the edge of the rim and bounces up, hits the top of the backboard, and then goes in. It's just part of getting better the more we shoot or swing. But we have to know that the results don't always consistently match up to the intentions. But if we don't know what the intentions are, how could we ever measure the results? And so, in the simple sense of being more and more control of this process, guys, one simple example that people resonate with all the time is, well, give me an example of what this means. I'm like, well, tell me something that you bought recently. Tell me something you financed recently. Almost always it's a vehicle, a personal loan, debt consolidation, a business loan, a mortgage. And so we'll just kind of walk through that at a simple level and say, what if you could have controlled some of, part of, all of this repayment process? What if you could control how much or how little you put in? What if you could have not made a payment? And you just kind of start walking people through how they've traditionally thought about accessing loans and start making the comparison. And then lots of times their eyes start going, huh, didn't know that was possible, you know? And Brock, you said something early on in our conversation. I like to ask this question. I mainly only do it to advisors who are really being snarky and bankers. It's only happened a few times. I'll say, do you completely control the banking function in your life? Now, these are people who understand banking. Okay. And I have yet to get an answer of yes that was truly yes. It's always tied to the bank or the market, always. And then that's how I know they're not ready for any further conversation. I mean that humbly. Like I'll just be like, moving on, because I'll say something like, well, I'm close to controlling 30% of the capital fully that comes through my life every year, or whatever the number is. And they're like, what do you mean? You know what I mean? So there's just sometimes questions are better than statements. And a good question to frame this to finish up with is, what would it mean to you to control 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, 100,000, 500,000 of cash or capital that you fully could be the bank on? What would that mean to you? I don't think there's anybody that would go, well, that'd be worse than what I'm already experiencing. Guys, lots of times people, when they listen to this, if they're new to it, there's just so much to try to process, especially if they hop in and just catch this episode and they hadn't gone back. Tied up in a bow on really what it looks like to come to us or anybody that does what we do, and why it's so important to realize that this is a process, not a one-time conversation or transaction.
Go to cashflowlegendz.com and schedule a call.
There you go.
Start asking questions. That's the best place to start.
Brock and Nate, are you ever going to tell somebody this is what you should do after one phone call?
Probably not.
Nope. If y'all are like, if we're all like similar, and I'm sure we are, often it leads to next action steps that those people decide they want to take, that they're excited about, and they invite us along for the ride. And then we go, okay, here's our next meeting. These are the action steps you decided you want to take. You are giving me permission for accountability to check in on that. And guess what? They're excited about it, which is pretty stinking cool.
Now, if
Go
you're
ahead,
not
Nate.
ready to schedule a call, I'll plug Read Becoming Your Own Banker and let it
Yep.
challenge your thinking a little bit.
Yep. Absolutely. 92 pages. If you are not a reader or a listener, start there of information. Let it challenge your thinking. I told a young lady the other day, said the best thing you can do right now is quit trying to think about what kind of rate of return you can get on anything outside and start thinking about what kind of rate of return you can get on that brain God gave you in your heart. She goes, what do you mean? I said, what are you reading? Well, I hadn't been reading. You want some recommendations? And that's not a judgmental thing. 7 years ago, 8 years ago, I did not read other than if I had to. I'm just telling you that I now know that the most successful leaders prioritize reading, period, point blank. I'm going to read this message if I can find it real quick because it was very relevant. So this is somebody who's gone through our process, been a friend of ours for a long time, but just now has experienced enough pain points about what the next season of life is in their 40s that they're realizing that money is just a tool to fuel. Ooh, I like that. Money is just a tool to fuel their purpose. And they feel like it's out of alignment right now because they can't envision doing what they've been doing for the rest of their life. So they're going on a journey. So they have gone headfirst, reading, learning, conversating, discussing. They have done it. I'm just bouncing things back and forth. He says this morning, I find it funny how I never understood how people could read, listen to multiple books at a time. But right now, I'm reading the Bible chronologically in the mornings in a men group that he and I are in together, listening to Money Unmasked on my way to work, reading Budgeting Sucks when I have time during the day, and listening to that sermon series that we talked about in the afternoons. I was not doing this a month ago. Crazy. I got chills because I know them and love them personally. Because there's nothing better than seeing friends and people you care about choose to embrace investing in themselves in alignment with what they're great at anyway. So, guys, we'll finish on that next week. What will we be talking about next week? I know that's my job to say it ahead of time. Breaking the cycle. How to stop living paycheck to paycheck. If you just heard me say that, go back and watch what Brock, Nate, and I did an episode or two ago. I don't remember the name of it, where we walk through the cash flow system. That's a really good place to start. We can help you with that. Go to cashflowlegendz.com and get on Nate's schedule or Brock's schedule or however that's set up. That tells you how much I know about what we do on the front side.
It's my schedule.
It's Nate's schedule. Okay. And then, how to stop living paycheck to paycheck. Even if I have a clear path of how to do that in a year, I'm going to feel way better than staying where I am right now. So we are never staying the same. We're either working towards something new and growing, or we're going backwards and building a habit that's putting us or keeping us where we are. So hope you all have a blessed day. We appreciate your time today. Hit those like, subscribe, and share buttons. Leave us some comments, and we will catch you on the next one. Appreciate it, guys.